mother and her child in 1898. Behind them, something that shouldn't be there. Professor Emily Watson had been digitizing the archives of the Boston Public Library's historical photograph collection for 3 months when she encountered the image that would change everything. The photograph, donated by the estate of Mrs. Catherine Morrison, showed a tender moment between a young mother and her infant child, captured in what appeared to be a modest parlor in 1898 Boston. The sepia-toned portrait depicted Martha Henley, a woman of perhaps 25, seated in an ornate wooden chair with her baby daughter, Lucy, cradled gently in her arms. Martha wore a simple but elegant dark dress with white lace collar, her hair pinned back in the Gibson girl style popular during the late Victorian era. The baby, no more than 6 months old, was wrapped in a christening gown of delicate white cotton and lace. Everything about the photograph spoke of maternal love and Victorian domesticity. The soft lighting filtering through lace curtains created an almost ethereal quality around the mother and child. Martha's expression was serene, her eyes gazing down at her daughter with unmistakable tenderness. It was the kind of portrait that wealthy families commission to commemorate precious moments in their children's lives. But as Emily adjusted the digital scanner's resolution to capture the finest details, something in the background caught her attention. Behind the mother and child, partially visible through what appeared to be a doorway leading to another room, was a shadow that didn't belong. The shape was wrong for furniture or typical household items of the period. Emily leaned closer to her computer screen, squinting at the grainy background details. The shadow appeared to have human proportions, but the positioning was unnatural, almost as if someone was hanging or suspended in the adjacent room. She rubbed her eyes, thinking fatigue might be playing tricks on her vision. That can't be right, she whispered to herself in the quiet archive room. She enhanced the image digitally, increasing the contrast and brightness of the background area. What emerged made her heart race with a mixture of excitement and dread. This wasn't just another Victorian family portrait. This was potentially evidence of something far more sinister that had been hidden in plain sight for over a century. Emily spent the remainder of that day researching the Henley family in Boston's extensive municipal records. What she discovered painted a picture of tragedy and loss that made her growing suspicions about the photograph even more disturbing. Martha Henley, née Patterson, had been the wife of Dr. Edmund Henley, a respected physician who practiced in Boston's affluent Back Bay neighborhood during the 1890s. The family had lived in a substantial brownstone on Marlborough Street, one of the most prestigious addresses in the city. Dr. Henley's medical practice catered to Boston's elite families, and contemporary newspaper accounts described him as a pillar of the community, a member of the Massachusetts Medical Society, a regular attendee at Trinity Church, and a generous supporter of various charitable causes, including the Boston Children's Hospital. Martha had been known for her involvement in local women's charitable organizations, particularly those focused on helping immigrant families and orphaned children. She had been described in society pages as a devoted mother, an exemplary Christian woman, whose kindness extends to all who know her. But as Emily dug deeper into the family's history, she began to uncover disturbing inconsistencies in the official record. The photograph was dated 1898, yet she could find no record of baby Lucy Henley after that year. Birth records confirmed Lucy's birth in February 1898, but there was no death certificate, no baptismal record beyond infancy, and no mention of the child in any subsequent family documents. More puzzling still, Emily discovered that Martha Henley had been institutionalized at McLean Hospital in Belmont in early 1899, committed by her husband for what medical records described as severe melancholia and nervous exhaustion. The commitment papers, filed by Dr. Henley himself, claimed that his wife had become increasingly unstable and prone to violent episodes, following what he described as the tragic loss of our infant daughter. Yet Emily could find no official record of Lucy Henley's death. It was as if the child had simply vanished from all documentation after the photograph was taken. As evening shadows lengthened across the archive room, Emily found herself staring once again at the tender image of Martha holding her baby, wondering what terrible secret might be hidden in the darkness behind them. The next morning, Emily contacted Dr. James Richmond, a colleague at Harvard Medical School who specialized in the history of medicine and had access to historical medical records that weren't available to the general public. She needed to understand more about Dr. Edmund Henley's medical practice and his wife's institutionalization. "I've never had anyone request records this old for a criminal investigation," Dr. Richmond noted when Emily called him. "What exactly are you looking for?" "I'm not sure it's criminal yet," Emily replied carefully, "but I've found some inconsistencies in a family's history that don't add up. The mother was institutionalized for the loss of a child, but there's no record of the child's death." 2 hours later, Dr. E. Richmond arrived at the library with a thick folder of photocopied documents from McLean Hospital's archives. As they spread the papers across Emily's desk, a disturbing picture began to emerge of Martha Henley's time at the institution. Martha's medical records described a woman who had suffered what would today be recognized as a complete psychological breakdown. Upon admission, she had been diagnosed with puerperal insanity, a 19th century term for postpartum mental illness. However, her symptoms, as described by the attending physicians, suggested something far more serious than postpartum depression. "She speaks constantly of her child," one doctor's note read, "claims that Lucy is still alive and that her husband has hidden the child from her. She becomes violent when staff attempt to convince her that the child has passed away. Patient insists that she witnessed her husband commit an act of violence against the infant." Another entry, dated 6 months into Martha's confinement, was even more chilling. "Patient continues to maintain that Dr. Henley murdered their daughter. She provides detailed accounts of what she claims to have witnessed on the day of the child's disappearance. While these accounts are likely the product of her deteriorated mental state, the consistency and specificity of her story are troubling." Dr. Richmond looked up from the records with concern. "Emily, if these medical notes are accurate, Martha Henley wasn't suffering from simple grief over a child's natural death. She was accusing her husband of murder." Emily felt her heart racing as she looked back at the photograph on her computer screen. And this picture was taken shortly before the child disappeared and Martha was institutionalized. Armed with the disturbing medical records from McLean Hospital, Emily decided to contact the Boston Police Department's Cold Case Unit. Detective Michael O'Sullivan, a 20-year veteran of the force with Irish ancestry and a particular interest in historical cases involving Boston's immigrant communities, agreed to meet with her. "Professor Watson, I have to tell you up front that we don't typically investigate cases that are over a century old," Detective O'Sullivan said as they sat in the library's conference room. "But the evidence you've presented, the photograph, the medical records, the missing death certificate, it's compelling enough to warrant a closer look." Emily had prepared enlarged prints of the photograph, with the background area enhanced to show the disturbing shadow more clearly. As Detective O'Sullivan examined the images with a magnifying glass, his expression grew increasingly grave. "You're right to be concerned about this," he said finally. "That shadow in the background, the proportions, the positioning, it looks like a small body. And given the medical records you found about Martha Henley's accusations," Detective O'Sullivan brought in Officer Lisa Chen, a forensic photographer who specialized in digital enhancement of evidence. Using advanced software, they were able to clarify the background of the photograph in ways that Emily hadn't been able to achieve with the library's basic equipment. What emerged from their analysis was horrifying. The shadow in the adjacent room was clearly the silhouette of an infant, positioned in a way that suggested the child was not alive when the photograph was taken. The enhancement also revealed what appeared to be medical instruments or tools arranged nearby. "This photograph may have been taken as documentation," Officer Chen observed clinically. "In the 1890s, it wasn't uncommon for families to photograph deceased children as a form of memento mori, but the positioning here and the fact that the mother and living child are posed separately from the deceased infant suggests something else entirely." Detective O'Sullivan studied Martha Henley's face in the photograph more carefully. "Look at her expression," he said quietly. "She's not looking at the camera or even at the baby in her arms. She's looking toward that doorway, toward where we can see the shadow." She knew what was in that room. Emily felt a chill as she realized the implications. "You think she was forced to pose for this photograph? That her husband made her sit for a portrait while their dead baby was in the next room? Or worse?" Detective O'Sullivan replied grimly. "Given Dr. Henley's medical background and the tools visible in the enhancement, this might have been documentation of something that went far beyond simple murder. The investigation into Dr. Edmund Henley's background revealed a man whose public reputation as a respected physician masked much darker activities. Detective O'Sullivan's team discovered that Henley had been involved in several controversial medical experiments during the 1890s, a period when medical ethics were far less regulated than they would become in the 20th century. Through records at the Massachusetts Medical Society, they learned that Henley had been particularly interested in pediatric medicine and what he termed developmental abnormalities in infants. He had published several papers in medical journals about surgical interventions for children born with physical deformities, procedures that were considered experimental and dangerous even by the standards of his time. More disturbing were the private letters Emily discovered in the papers of Dr. William Osler, a prominent physician who had corresponded with Henley. In one letter, dated 1897, Osler expressed concern about Henley's increasingly aggressive approach to pediatric surgery and his troubling disregard for patient welfare in pursuit of medical advancement. Edmund's ambitions seemed to override his medical judgment, Osler had written. He speaks of his work as if his patients were merely subjects for experimentation, rather than human beings deserving of care and compassion. Detective O'Sullivan's team also uncovered financial records showing that Henley had received payments from several wealthy Boston families for what were described as private medical consultations. These payments were substantial, far more than a typical physician would charge for standard medical care. The breakthrough came when they discovered the diary of Nurse Catherine Murphy, who had worked briefly in Dr. Henley's private practice in 1898. Murphy's diary, preserved in the archives of the Boston Public Health Department, contained entries that painted a horrifying picture of what had transpired in Henley's medical office. Dr. Henley performs procedures on infants that no Christian soul should witness, Murphy had written in her careful script. He claims these operations are necessary to correct God's mistakes, but I fear he is driven by pride and ambition rather than healing the babies who come to his office. Many do not survive, and those who do are changed in ways that break their parents' hearts. Murphy's final entry about Dr. Henley was dated just weeks before Lucy Henley's disappearance. I can no longer remain in Dr. Henley's employ. Today I witnessed him perform an operation on his own infant daughter, claiming she suffered from deformities that required correction. The child's screams, I will hear them until my dying day. The investigation team realized that Martha Henley's detailed accusations, preserved in her medical records at McLean Hospital, might represent the only eyewitness testimony to what had actually happened to baby Lucy. Detective O'Sullivan obtained a court order to access Martha's complete medical file, including session notes from her conversations with hospital physicians. What they found was a consistent and detailed account of events that painted Dr. Henley as a man whose medical ambitions had driven him to perform experimental surgery on his own child. According to Martha's statements, recorded by Dr. Samuel Adams at McLean Hospital, Lucy had been born with a minor cleft palate, a condition that was noticeable but not life-threatening. Edmund became obsessed with correcting what he saw as an imperfection in our daughter, Martha had told Dr. Adams during one of their sessions. He spoke of surgical techniques he had been developing, procedures that could make Lucy perfect. I begged him to leave her as God had made her, but he insisted that as a physician, he had a duty to heal her. Martha's account described how Dr. Henley had set up a makeshift surgical suite in their home, converting a spare room into what he called his private laboratory. She had been forbidden from entering this room, but on the day Lucy disappeared, she had heard her daughter's cries and had forced her way inside. What I saw in that room will haunt me forever, Martha had told the hospital physician. Edmund had performed surgery on Lucy, but something had gone terribly wrong. Our beautiful baby, she was no longer alive. Edmund was standing over her body with his instruments, and when he saw me, he began shouting that I was too ignorant to understand his important work. According to Martha's testimony, Dr. Henley had then forced her to pose for the photograph with a living infant, apparently the child of one of his patients whom he had brought to the house for comparison purposes. The dead baby Lucy was positioned in the adjacent room, where her body could be documented as part of Henley's medical records. He said I must never speak of what I had seen, Martha had continued. He told me that if I reported what had happened, he would have me committed to an asylum as a madwoman. He said no one would believe that a respected physician would harm his own child. Emily felt sick as she read Martha's detailed testimony. She was telling the truth all along. Her husband murdered their baby in the name of medical experimentation, and then had her institutionalized when she tried to expose what he had done. As the investigation progressed, Detective O'Sullivan's team uncovered evidence of a systematic cover-up that extended far beyond Dr. Henley's individual crimes. The wealthy and influential families who had been Dr. Henley's private patients had a vested interest in ensuring that his experimental procedures remained secret, particularly when those procedures resulted in the deaths or disfigurement of their children. Through bank records and private correspondence, they discovered that several prominent Boston families had paid substantial sums to Dr. Henley for what they believed would be corrective surgery for their children's minor birth defects. When these procedures resulted in tragedy, the families found themselves complicit in covering up the deaths to avoid scandal. The Beacon Hill Adamses, the Back Bay Cabots, and the Brookline Lowells, some of Boston's most prestigious families, had all lost children under Dr. Henley's care. Rather than reporting these deaths to authorities, they had worked together to create false documentation and ensure that Dr. Henley's reputation remained intact. It was a conspiracy of silence, Emily observed as they reviewed the evidence. These families were more concerned with protecting their social standing than seeking justice for their dead children. Dr. Henley's commitment of his wife to McLean Hospital had been facilitated by Dr. Charles Putnam, a prominent psychiatrist who was also a member of Boston's elite social circle. Putnam's notes revealed that he had never seriously investigated Martha's accusations against her husband, dismissing them as the delusions of a grief-stricken mother. More damning still was the discovery that Dr. Putnam had financial ties to several families who had lost children under Dr. Henley's care. The psychiatrist had received substantial donations to McLean Hospital from these same families, creating a clear conflict of interest in his treatment of Martha Henley. The photograph itself, Detective O'Sullivan realized, had been taken as insurance, documentation that Dr. Henley could use to prove to his wealthy patrons that his experimental procedures were scientifically sound. By photographing both a living child and the results of his surgery on Lucy, he was creating evidence that he believed would vindicate his methods. Henley wasn't just a murderer, Detective O'Sullivan concluded. He was running an operation that preyed on wealthy families' desires for perfect children, and when his experiments failed, the entire Boston establishment helped him cover it up. The investigation into Martha Henley's time at McLean Hospital revealed one of the most heartbreaking aspects of the entire case. Hospital records showed that Martha had spent 15 years in the institution, from 1899 until her death in 1914. During that time, she had never stopped insisting that her husband had murdered their daughter and that she had been wrongfully committed. Dr. Adams' session notes documented Martha's deteriorating mental state over the years, but they also revealed a woman whose core testimony never wavered. Even as her other memories began to fade, she continued to provide consistent details about what she had witnessed in her husband's makeshift surgical suite. Patient remains fixated on the events of 1898, Dr. Adams had written in 1905. Despite 7 years of treatment, she continues to maintain her accusations against Dr. Henley with remarkable consistency. While her other faculties have declined, her memory of these specific events remains unnaturally sharp. Emily discovered that Martha had written dozens of letters during her confinement, most of them addressed to various authorities in Boston: the police chief, the mayor, the district attorney, even the governor of Massachusetts. These letters, preserved in the hospital's archives, were desperate pleas for someone to investigate her husband's crimes and secure her release from the asylum. "I am not mad," Martha had written in one letter to the Boston police chief in 1902. "I have been imprisoned because I witnessed my husband commit murder. The photograph he took that day, if you could find it and examine it closely, you would see the truth of what I speak. My innocent child lies dead while I am condemned to live with the memory of her final moments." None of these letters had ever received responses. In the social climate of early 20th century Boston, the word of a woman committed to an asylum carried no weight against the reputation of a respected physician and the powerful families who supported him. Perhaps most tragically, Martha had died just months before changes in Massachusetts law would have granted her the right to legal representation and a review of her commitment. By 1914, progressive reformers were beginning to challenge the ease with which women could be institutionalized by male relatives, but the changes came too late for Martha Henley. While Martha languished in McLean Hospital, Dr. Edmund Henley continued to practice medicine and maintain his reputation as one of Boston's most respected physicians. Detective O'Sullivan's research revealed that Henley had not only escaped consequences for his crimes, but had actually prospered in the years following his wife's commitment. Hospital records from Massachusetts General showed that Henley had been promoted to chief of pediatric surgery in 1903, just 4 years after murdering his own daughter. He had continued his experimental procedures, though apparently with more caution about documenting his failures. The wealthy families who had lost children under his care remained silent, bound by their own complicity in the cover-up. Henley had remarried in 1905 to Elizabeth Thornton, the daughter of a prominent banking family. Society pages from the period described the wedding as one of the most elegant events of the Boston social season. The new Mrs. Henley was praised for her charitable work and her devotion to her stepmother role, though records showed the couple never had children of their own. Financial records revealed that Henley had amassed considerable wealth through his medical practice and wise investments in Boston's growing textile industry. By 1910, he owned property in Back Bay, Newport, and Palm Beach, living the lifestyle of Boston's most elite citizens. The photograph of Martha and baby Lucy had remained in Henley's possession until his death in 1923. It had then passed to his second wife, who had kept it among family documents without understanding its significance. After Elizabeth Henley's death in 1956, the photograph had eventually made its way through various family members before being donated to the Boston Public Library as part of a general collection of historical Boston family photographs. For over 60 years after Martha's death, this evidence of her husband's crimes was sitting in someone's attic. Emily observed bitterly, if she had lived just a few more years, if women had been taken seriously when they reported crimes, if the authorities had bothered to investigate, Detective O'Sullivan nodded grimly. Henley lived a long, prosperous life while his wife died forgotten in an asylum and his victims remained silent in their graves. The system protected him at every level. While Dr. Edmund Henley had escaped earthly justice, Emily and Detective O'Sullivan were determined that his crimes would not remain hidden forever. Working with the Boston Police Department, the Massachusetts Historical Society, and McLean Hospital, they began the process of formally documenting their findings and ensuring that Martha Henley and baby Lucy would finally be remembered and honored. The first step was locating Martha's grave at the McLean Hospital Cemetery, where patients who died without family to claim them had been buried in unmarked plots. Using hospital records and burial logs, they identified the location of Martha's grave and arranged for a proper headstone that would honor her memory and acknowledge the injustice she had suffered. The inscription read, Martha Patterson Henley, 1873-1914. Loving mother, truth teller. I am not mad. I have witnessed murder. Below her name was added, Lucy Henley, 1898. Beloved daughter. Justice, delayed but not denied. The case attracted significant media attention, particularly from advocates for women's rights and medical ethics reform. The story of Martha Henley resonated with contemporary discussions about believing women's testimony and the historical silencing of female voices in cases of domestic violence and medical abuse. McLean Hospital issued a formal apology for their role in Martha's wrongful confinement and established the Martha Henley Memorial Fund to support research into the historical mistreatment of women in psychiatric institutions. The Massachusetts Medical Society also acknowledged Dr. Henley's crimes and used the case as an example in their ethics training programs. The photograph itself was ultimately displayed in a special exhibition at the Boston Public Library titled Hidden Truths, When Evidence Speaks for the Silenced. The exhibition drew thousands of visitors and sparked important conversations about medical ethics, women's rights, and the power of photographic evidence to reveal historical injustices. Martha Henley fought for 15 years to make people believe her story, Emily told reporters at the exhibition's opening. She died thinking that her truth would never be known, that her daughter's murder would never be acknowledged. But evidence has a way of surviving, even when the people who created it intended it to hide their crimes. Detective O'Sullivan reflected on the case's broader implications during his remarks at Martha's memorial service. This case reminds us that victims of crimes don't stop deserving justice just because time passes. Martha and Lucy Henley waited over a century for someone to listen to their story, but they never stopped waiting. Our job as investigators, as historians, and as human beings is to keep listening, even to voices from the past. The corner of Dr. Henley's surgical room, once hiding evidence of unspeakable crimes, had finally revealed its dark secret, not just about one man's evil, but about the systems that protected perpetrators and silenced victims, and the importance of never accepting that injustice is simply how things were.